Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bass, and today we're talking about how to catch bass when it's hot. When that blistering summer heat sets in, what do you throw? Where do you throw it? How do you catch these fish? Summer heat is brutal. There's no way around it. I don't care if you're in the West getting dry heat or you're in the South getting that sopping wet heat. It's hot. It's hot everywhere and it's brutal. If you're not catching fish, it won't take long for you to have no desire to be out on the water. But let me tell you, right now, in the baking heat, when it's miserable, is one of the best bites of the entire year, and almost everyone overlooks it. Seriously. And I'm not talking about getting up at first light. Like this morning, I've got a little bit of cloud cover this morning. I came out early before the miserable heat set in. Got a little cloud cover, got a little chop. It's hot. I'm sweaty as can be, but it's nowhere near as hot as it's about to be. This isn't what I'm talking about. If you go out right now, you've got to cover water. Bass in the early mornings, in the peak of heat, peak of July, peak of August, they get a little active in the morning. People think that's prime time. That's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about embracing the suck. The worst part of the day. High sun, high heat, slick calm, misery. And I'm going to tell you how to catch giant bass right in the middle of that. The fishing is so good that it's worth being out in the middle of that mess. So here's the deal. Here's what you need to understand. When it gets hot, everything revolves around shade. Period. Shade is king. If you're in a shallow water fishery, those bass are in the thickest cover in the darkest shade. If there's docks, they're under the docks in the darkest part of the shade. But there's also shade in places you don't expect. We talk about the color line a lot in highland reservoirs. The color line is another form of shade. The color line is where light penetration stops reaching the bottom of the lake. Depending how clear your lake is, that could be in 10 feet, 20 feet, 100 feet. But where that light penetration stops, there is a line out there where bass can suspend in the shade because the sun is no longer reaching them and they can look up and they can hunt out. So no matter the type of lake, whether you can visually see shade or if it's just open water, there is still shade. The bass know where it is. They know how to use it. And the most important thing that I can try to pound into you is the highest sun heat of the day is where that shade becomes most critical for the fish, which makes them most vulnerable to being caught by you, the angler who understands how they're positioning. So again, if you want to avoid the heat, you go out early and late in the day. You go night fishing. Fish will be up and active and moving around, but they are far less predictable. If you want the pattern that nobody's running, that catches giants, you get out there in the peak of the day, you drink a lot of water, keep those liquids flowing, don't get yourself hurt, but you get out there in the heat of the day and these bass will be so predictable on shade. I've got a handful of baits here for you. Essentially 2 patterns for fishing shallow cover, 3 patterns for fishing out deeper. All of them revolve around shade, whether we realize it or not. Let's talk about shallow first. Let's talk about grass fishing, cover fishing, okay? When I'm talking shade, a few years ago, I heard a buddy use the term double shade. Double shade. I want you to remember that because that is the key to the pattern. What that meant, at the time we were talking about it, he was actually talking about it as a negative. But I've found in a lot of situations it can be an incredible positive. So let's take a cheese mat, right? It's summertime, grass has grown up, there's cheese on the surface. Underneath that cheese is shade. Well, in the middle of that mat, maybe there's some reeds that stick up, or maybe there's a lily pad. There's a second form of shade. There's double shade. They've got shade from the pad and they've got shade from the cheese mat. That double shade is right where the best fish is going to be. They take the best spots. So I'm going down an edge of reeds. There's no surface grass, just reeds in the water, and you're flipping the thick clumps, right? Because that's the dark stuff. But all of a sudden you find one little patch of hyacinth that's blown in. That hyacinth is laid up against those reeds. Now you've got shadows from the reeds, shadows from the hyacinth. You've got double shade. That is the sweet spot. So when I'm covering water, because this time of year, I mean, let's face it, it's miserable. I said earlier, embrace the suck. We probably ought to put that on a t-shirt, honestly. You've just got to embrace it. I turn that trolling motor up and I'm looking for shallow water targets. I'm looking for those spots that I think the best fish are going to be. You can fan cast miles of cheese. You can fish grass edges for days. You can flip reeds day after day after day. But when you notice that there are spots that are, for lack of another term, double shade, you immediately start seeing the key places you need to cast, and you can cover a lot more water. And you'll find that as you're just hitting those prime spots, the size of your catches will get a lot bigger. So when I'm targeting that stuff, it's a 1-2 punch. I'm on top if I can. I go in and get them if I have to. So number one for me is a frog. The frog in that thick, shallow cover. The beauty of a frog is you can also fish it in the open water. So you can fish it completely open, or you can fish it deep in the junk. The frogs that I choose, though, are very specific. You want frogs for this application, because we're talking double cover, double shade, the thickest stuff. I want the most weedless frogs I can get. This frog from Savage Gear, that's the DC Walker frog, is the single most weedless frog that I have found. That frog, it's not my favorite open water frog. It's my favorite super thick cover frog. It's the frog that I can throw across a pad field, pull it through the pads, and I know I'm not going to hook a pad stem. The hook points are fully protected. Fully protected. And that is key. When the fish eat it, as long as they eat it good, I can still smash them and I've got them. But those hook points are so tight in there that I don't spend my entire day tugging on reeds, tugging on pads, trying to get my frog back. The right frog makes all the difference. If I'm having trouble hooking my fish, I'll drop down to that Spro Bronzeye 65. That slightly smaller profile is easier for them to get the whole frog in their mouth. It's not quite as weedless as the Savage Gear. Like if I run a finger on here, that time I didn't stick, but if I put any pressure, boop, it's got me. I hang up on that point. This one, I could just run over this thing all day. So this one is truly weedless. If you can get away with it, if they'll eat the bigger profile, it's amazing. But if they won't, that Bronzeye is a killer option. Notice the gill color. I think a lot of times this year, those big fish are targeting bluegill in that shallow cover. So I spend a lot of time with that bluegill type color. Outside of that, it's the big three: white, black, chartreuse. And not in that order. Truthfully, it goes chartreuse, white, then black. But more and more on this pattern, I focus my time on those gill colors. Now, if I can't get those fish to come up, maybe it's just too hot, they're too lethargic, they're burrowed in that heavy cover, and I need to punch through to get them, nothing wrong with that. Punching is a major, major deal this time of year. There's a handful of creatures that I use. This is that 4-inch Paca Slim, one of my all-time favorite baits. It's got a subtle kick to it. It's amazing. Put that on a big piece of tungsten, big Texas rig. And one thing I do very different, you'll notice, that's a wide gap hook. Most people use a big J hook, a big flippin' style hook. I don't. I use wide gaps, but I use the Owner Jungle wide gap because it's a super stout wire. A lot of the wide gap hooks, you'll just bend them out. But through the years, I've heard so many people that are truly flipping or punching heavy cover. So many people talk about the giants that they hooked, but they don't get them out of the cover. I find that when I get them on that wide gap, I get more of those fish out. That's why I focus on that wide gap. But again, that jungle wide gap, that heavier wire, is a critical part of that deal. The other thing that I do, if I can get away with it, is I flip a jig instead of a Texas rig. Here's the deal. This is more weedless and will go through easier than this because this big skirt is sticking out. It's catching in the junk when I'm trying to do it, okay? So if I can get a 1/2 to 5/8 up to 3/4 through the junk, then I can get my jig through there too. But if it's more than that, if it's taken an ounce or an 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces of tungsten, I don't stand a chance getting a jig in there. The jig, again, you need more weight to get through the same stuff. So if it's lighter cover, I'm 100% using the jig. And the reason why is that the hookup to land ratio is better. If they eat this and I smash them with that big hook, and then after I smash them, that weed guard is putting back pressure on the roof of their mouth. It's holding the hook in place. I get way more of those fish out. So if I can, I want the jig. This is that Dirty Jigs no jack jig, and I'll link all this stuff in the video description. Exact sizes, exact colors, exact trailer, all that stuff for you. But if that cover is a little bit heavier, as I was saying, sometimes I just can't get the jig through. That's when I go to tungsten, I go to the Texas rig, but I stick with that wide gap hook. One of my favorite baits, again, from NetBait is that 4-inch Paca Slim. My other all-time favorite bait, it's sort of a sleeper bait that I don't see anyone else talk about, from Jackal. This is called the Archelon. I'm gonna turn it around so you can kind of see one of the baits. The Archelon is a very subtle bait. It's got a hollow cavity in the middle, so I can stick my hook point in and completely hide it inside the bait and be incredibly weedless. And then these little flat claws just have the most subtle little kick to them. Very, very subtle. But through the years, through the decades, I've done so much damage on that bait. You're gonna see me throw a lot of black blue, a lot of hematoma, but you'll also see me throw a lot of these green pumpkin with blues. So tilapia, or in the case of the Archelon, it's called school bluegill. That's the color, I'm telling you. Now, I would be remiss to not show you Tim's favorite as well, because Tim also has a favorite flipping bait. He loves, from Big Bite, this is the Big Bite Baits BFE. That is his favorite flipping bait, and that color's called tilapia. Again, it's got that green pumpkin with that blue fleck in it. There's something about that. I think it does a great job of imitating those bluegill. But regardless of the one that you choose, I spend my time with either that black and blue or that green pumpkin with that blue flake in it. Those are the two ways that I go. And then again, a frog, if I can get them to eat it. That's shallow cover in a nutshell. You're looking for double shade during the hottest, most miserable part of the day. Because the worse the heat gets, the more those shallow fish need to hide. Boy, that sun popped out, speaking of heat. Whew. They need to hide, so they will head for that thickest cover. If you're there too early in the day, they won't be there yet. But the peak of the day, they're there, they're predictable, and you can catch them. Now, not all fish are up there in shallow cover. I already started talking about fishing out on that shadow line, out on that color line. There are fish that will pull offshore as far as they have to get away from the light penetration, which is the exact same thing. They are looking for that shade. You just can't see it. It's not like a dock on the bank and you're like, oh, there's shade there. Oh, there's shade under that tree right now. It's all about light penetration. The way you find that is by looking for that color line. The other place is going to be the very outside edges of grass lines. We've talked about that as well. Find that grass, find that outermost edge, right at the bottom of that edge. Those fish will line up there too, because they can hide inside the grass edge down deep. They can tuck in, sit in the shade, but they're looking out at the lit up open water and they can ambush out to get their prey. So depending on the scenario, if you're on an outside grass edge like that, the jig again is a major player for me. Jig and a shaky head, but the jig is my number one because I know if I'm putting in the time on a miserable hot day, it's because I want to catch a giant, not because I want to catch a bass. I can catch a bass in the morning. I can catch a bass when it's cool out. I can catch a giant in the heat of the day, and I know the jig gives me my best shot at that true giant. So I spend my time on that jig. 1/2 ounce pitching jig. The color is called Go-To. Again, that same 4-inch pack of slim on the back. I'm very consistent with the baits I throw, and I change it a little bit here and there. Maybe in the coming week, 2-3 weeks, something like that, we'll do a more in-depth jig specific video for you guys to really line that out, because a jig is a major big fish catcher this time of year. But if you could only have one, 1/2 ounce pitching jig, Go-To color, 4-inch pack of slim. I like tilapia or green pumpkin red. Those are great colors. But that jig on those outer grass lines. Now for people that don't have grass, now we're talking about being out on that true color line, ledge fishing, fishing outside structure, right? Perfect scenario. You find outside structure right on the color line, 1-2 punch. Number one for me is still the wobblehead. I mean, we've been talking about this since May. Every year, May, June, July, even into August, the wobblehead is such a major part of my arsenal. It is such a big fish catcher. Every year, and this year was no different, I catch a monster on that setup right there. That's that adrenaline craw in the June bug. I either throw June bug or dark June bug. If the water's a little clearer, I throw dark June bug. It's a little murkier, I throw June bug. One's just a little bolder than the other. But again, in the video description, I'll link the specifics. I won't go into the specifics on this head. It's a Dirty Jigs swing head. I'll give you all that in the video description, exact sizes, the hook sizes, because it's very specific. But that wobble head allows me to get on that outside structure, cover a lot of water. We're not slow dragging that on the bottom. Chucking out, hit the bottom, start winding. We're covering water. It's like a crankbait or a spinnerbait or anything else that's moving, a swim bait. We're moving that thing, okay? A lot of movement. That's a major deal. The other one is the crankbait. And the key with the crankbait, deep diving crankbait this time of year, there's 2 things. One, you've got to get deep enough to get below that light penetration. And then 2, you want a bold color that they can see. These fish, they're willing to hunt, especially the outside deeper fish. They're willing to hunt, they're willing to chase. They just need to see it. So the most natural colors that I throw will be the bold, solid whites. But you're gonna see me throwing a lot of chartreuse, a lot of blues, all the way up to like full-blown powder blue chartreuse, like bright neon chartreuse. Because again, it's not about them wanting to feed or not feed. They'll run it down. They just need to see it. This is the time of year I focus on that really bright, really bold stuff. And then the last thing, I didn't even bring them with me, but I'm gonna add one more because it really is all about shade. The last place that you're going to find that shade is on hard cover, on docks. Docks and laid down trees provide amazing shade in shallow water. And the number one way that I'm gonna get the big fish out, not fish, you go up there with a shaky head and a Senko, you can catch fish. But if you wanna catch the giants, if you're out there baking with a plan, with a purpose, use a swim bait. I'm either going to throw a wake bait or a big boot tail. It's one or the other. Those two baits both have enough drawing power to get fish to come out of those shadows to eat. Now, when it comes to docks, in the heat of the day, the only thing you need to understand is that the biggest fish take the darkest shade. Again, double shade. The darkest shade. If there's 20 docks and one has grass around the dock, so you've got grass creating shade and the dock creating shade, double shade, that's the one. But if they're not, you fish them all, but you fish the darkest part of the shadow. The little outer edges of the shadow, that's not where the giant is. The giant is all the way back in the darkest part of the shadow. So I'll either throw a big wake, like our tactical wake, on the outer edge and try to call those fish out, and it works really well. This is the time of year you'll see me walk that bait a little bit. Pop, 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 let it sit. Then start that steady retrieve, and they just come out and unglue on that thing. Or I'll take a paddle tail swim bait, 6-inch mag draft or 8-inch mag draft. Truthfully, I would recommend you use the 8-inch, but I know a lot of people are afraid of that bigger bait. So if you're afraid of it, throw a 6-inch. The 8-inch has more drawing power than a 6. It really does. But you can take that bait and you can skip it under those docks back into that shade and wind it out of there. I catch so many big dock fish by sending a mag draft back in there to get them. The wake bait, I fish the edges or areas that I can easily cast to and pick apart. That mag draft, that's the 4x4. I'll send it all the way back in there. But that's the last piece of the puzzle. Those docks can be a great spot. So the three places, just to recap: super shallow cover, you want that double shade. Pick it apart, get those key spots and run them. The second place is out off the bank where that light penetration is not making it to bottom. Get out on those spots. You can be aggressive. You can fish a jig, but you can also fish a wobblehead and a crankbait, and you can get those fish to react. And then last is fishing docks. And when it comes to docks, you want the deepest, darkest shade up inside those docks. That's where the best fish are located. Guys, it is not complicated. I'm telling you, this is the easiest pattern. Anybody can do it once your eyes have been opened. It's going to suck a little bit. The heat is rough. You've got to embrace it. But that peak sun, middle of the day, will position the fish in a predictable way, and you can catch them. I hope this makes a huge difference this summer for you. If it does, we want to hear about it. We want to hear about guys catching summertime giants. Again, I'll link everything in the video description for you. Specific baits, colors, all that stuff. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.